Right. Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the 16th talk in this only one theme talk series, which is focused around innovation management. This series, as you're aware, is hosted by the TechX.in vertical at Venture Center. Today's topic is negotiations, and the speaker for today is Mr. Hasit Seth. Let me briefly introduce Hasit. Hasit works as a counsel in the Bombay High Court. His key focus is on arbitrations, civil and writ litigation. He has negotiated many deals, most of them involving technology and related services. Hasit has formerly studied negotiations at Harvard Law School's program on negotiation. Over the past 20 years, he has been a partner at a law firm, general counsel for a MNC, a startup founder, and has worked in the US for 2 law firms doing patent litigation and prosecution. His computer science graduation was followed by LL.B and LL.M with a gold medal from Mumbai University. Later, he did a LL.M in IP from University of New Hampshire in the US. Hasit's interest areas include law, technology, deal negotiation, economics, and art. So welcome, Hasit, to the session, and over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mugdha. I will share the presentation. Shall I run the presentation from here, or
Yeah, you can go ahead and share the presentation.
Oh, got it. Hi, good afternoon, or rather good evening, everyone. We are somewhere between afternoon and evening. So that
Do you want to go full screen?
Yeah, I can go full screen. Let me try that. Yeah, and I'll do the slideshow.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So let's get started. Thank you to Venture Center for inviting me for this only negotiation series. And I've given this kind of talk earlier, but let's see what variations we can bring up this time. So if you had heard it before, few years before, maybe you can tell me what was different. All right. So this is my introduction, which Mugdha has given like a snapshot to you. I basically am a disputes lawyer doing arbitrations and court litigation, commercial litigation. I used to be in US, but since many years I'm back in India. That's my background. But tech remains, like my DNA. And most of the things I do have some or the other kind of technology involved. But these days I'm doing more of construction technology related stuff, arbitrations and disputes related, rather than electronics or telecommunications or something like that. All right. So let's say, like you enter into negotiations of this kind. Your company, which is ABC Limited, wants to buy 1,000 kilograms quantity of a material X from a manufacturer XYZ. XYZ agrees to supply 1,000 kgs of material, but cannot supply all of it within 1 month. It says that it can only supply 1,000 kgs over next 6 months. But XYZ says that if it is paid 1,000 rupees extra per kg, it can arrange to supply the material within 1 month. Your company ABC insists that it will only buy at an agreed price and wants the supply within 1 month itself. What happens next? So in the commercial world, changing positions is not very uncommon. You can say it's breach of trust, and you can say we had agreed to this and we have a contract, and you can go to the court and enforce it. But please note that breaching a contract is not a crime. I mean, there is a crime called criminal breach of trust and cheating. But what most people commonly think is cheating is not really what the law understands as cheating. I mean, ordinary commercial transactions where people change their positions and even like breach contracts is an acceptable thing. and all that they need to do is to compensate you if you have run into a loss. So here, this XYZ Limited, if it doesn't supply you all the promised quantity, all that it needs to do is to reimburse your losses. And that's how the commercial world works. I mean, so negotiations essentially help you navigate situations where, while you had inked something as a contract or you had agreed something as a contract over the email or over the phone, but situations have changed and you need to deal with it dynamically. And dealing with it dynamically would be simply another name for saying that you need to negotiate. All right. So let's consider what this field of negotiation is like, and we'll look up at some examples, as we go along. So one of the examples is my favorite example is of an operating system called CP/M or CP by M. This was pre MS-DOS, before Microsoft started selling MS-DOS or licensed it as IBM DOS disk operating system to IBM, which came with PCXT or PCs. So this guy was the market leader in what were known as microcomputers at that time, with this dominant operating system which ran on to many, many things. So when IBM decided to get into personal computing in 1980, they wanted a ready-made operating system. And the most obvious one was CP/M because people had developed a lot of skills over it. And it already had some applications running over it, like a basic, like a word formatter or word processor, and also a basic spreadsheet, VisiCalc, which was like Lotus 123 or what we have as Excel. The story goes that parties were not able to negotiate. That is Gary Kildall's team and IBM on a non-disclosure agreement that we cannot disclose it. But the savvy negotiations that happened from Microsoft's point of view, whereby a very small company dealing with a very large company like IBM was actually able to extract an extremely good deal from IBM, which not only created, like giant, which is Microsoft today, but also, at least IBM dominated the very initial phase of personal computing. Today, they don't make machines, nor operating systems, nor anything related to like PCs. They sold Lenovo, as you know, ThinkPad division to Lenovo, but it dominated that for the longest possible time, which 30-35 years in technology industry is a very big span. As such, but they did state standards, and those standards are still followed. Like everything has to be IBM PC compatible, as such. So the IBM then chose to negotiate with Microsoft, which was a tiny company. And what back-to-back negotiations Microsoft did was very, very interesting. Microsoft itself didn't have an operating system, so they licensed an operating system from like Bill Gates' friend called Tim Patterson, who had named it like QDOS, which was like quick and dirty operating system, or 86 DOS. So Gates offered IBM a non-exclusive license for DOS and a few compilers for like languages like BASIC and maybe Pascal. But look at the back-to-back deals they did. So he gets $700,000 from IBM for licensing this operating system to them on a non-exclusive basis, while he made Microsoft itself makes a deal with Patterson for only a small fee of $25,000 with a non-disclosure clause. So that's like your $675,000 of profit right away, as such. So this is an example of a savvy negotiation deal where back-to-back negotiations happen. And a lot of people may complain that why do we have like such an unfair world where there is so much information asymmetry? Well, you have to live with an open market and you have to live with an information asymmetry. What you know, other side may not know, and vice versa. Happens all the time. And there are some arbitrages and, advantages to be gained of information asymmetry. And that's how the market works. I mean, you get as best possible information and you make informed choices. And then live to tell the story if those informed choices were good or bad, as such. But that's part of entrepreneurship and developing a business. I mean, just cannot be escaped. So let's look at a little bit of a theoretical view of what negotiations are. And they are essentially a way for parties to reach an agreement that they agree upon certain thing. And the way to do it is that they persuade each other, I mean, to certain viewpoints and by finding common ground for an agreement. Remember, when parties start off, they may not be in the zone of agreeing upon anything, but it is possible through a series of concessions, rethings, like round of negotiations, give and takes, I mean, which would make the parties achieve a common ground. So interestingly here, there is no third party helping them to do it, because if there is a third party helping them to do it, that would be mediation or conciliation. But parties themselves are, like conducting negotiations to achieve at a favorable outcome. And that's what your negotiations are all about. So one may wonder, like where does in the business world negotiations fit? Rather, the question should be where do you not negotiate? I mean, so I've just put up a representative list of where negotiations happen. For example, you have salary negotiations, sales negotiations, investment negotiations, co-owner negotiations, lots of intra-team negotiations. There are usually disputes about who gets the best piece of work, who gets the credit, who gets to, have more resources. All kinds of team negotiations keep happening. You have product roadmap negotiations. The investors may think that you should go in this direction. You may think that company, you as the founder know much more about this field, and you think that, like the products that the company needs to roll out should have a different track. So those kind of negotiations are also common. Resource negotiations, I mean, with suppliers, vendors, as external people, but also internally, a lot of negotiations happen for resource allocations, because in a startup, all the kinds of like push pulls are happening, and like everybody's trying to scramble for negotiations. You have regulatory negotiations. The government also negotiates with you all the time in many aspects. Many licenses, permits, I mean, are essentially structured negotiations of some kind. Say, let's say you want a regulatory approval for a medical device from the FDA. They give you rejections of all kinds, and then you refile things and meet their safety or other obligations with clinical trial data and all that. So those are also regulatory kind of negotiations, except they're not happening across the table. They are happening in the document filings, I mean, as such. Lots of supply chains negotiations happen all the time, because supply chains are prone to disruptions, given that there may be better profits to be sought from doing other things. So very common occurrences, and these negotiations are also common. You have industrial labor negotiations, as like Air India pilots may soon go on a strike, I mean. So Tatas will find out, like taking over a government airline may not be the easiest thing they have done across their long history, although they founded Air India. But it was founded as a private company, and now they're taking up as an ex-public sector company. So we'll see how that goes. All kinds of boardroom level negotiations happening. You would have seen many startup situations where the founders are booted out of the boardroom. The investors essentially tell them that take a hike, you are now no longer required. We'll have somebody else run the company as professional managers. Happens many times, I mean. So there are lots of boardroom level negotiations, I mean, happening. You have business crisis negotiations. Lots of things go wrong all the time in business. So key people leave, like contracts don't get fulfilled, funds don't come in at time, products don't sell as expected, all kinds of sales negotiations you'll have to carry out to make sure, different stakeholders come on a common understanding of many things, to happen as such. There are lots of financial negotiations. It's not in the list. So it may be for debt, it may be for equity, it may be for hybrid kind of, like instruments which are a mix of debt and equity. All that also happens all the time. And you want to close business, that also requires considerable negotiations, to shut down a business. The process is quite simple. From outside, it may look like we are just doing ordinary conversations where proposals are put across. Each side tries to persuade the other side to their viewpoint using sometimes data, sometimes, a little bit of pressure, if not coercion. Coercion obviously would take you into dangerous territory, but putting pressure regarding time or availability or many other things is quite common in business negotiations. Then areas of common agreement are found. Hopefully, they are of mutual benefit. Concessions are given and taken all the time. Positions are changed dynamically. So somebody just being rigid about certain positions, that's really not negotiation. You're just digging in your heels and saying that I'll be in my trench and fight till the end. But that may just be like a very tough stance, but really not, you didn't negotiate. Because somebody who's negotiating is constantly calculating, in the change circumstances, am I going to be better off or am I going to make a loss? And is always constantly a sort of war gaming and gaming in their mind, simulating that what happens if I, like a chess player, that what happens if I take this particular, like direction, or I take some other direction, and, things like that. Yes, so I'll take questions somewhere in between. Please keep sharing them in the chat box. I'll go them with the series because I don't want to get lost in answering the questions before I cover some material. So let me cover the material at least halfway, but keep sending your questions as Mugdha has suggested to you to put them in the chat box. All right. So why do we negotiate? Like alternatives to negotiation essentially are conflicts, confusion, and chaos, which means you're negotiating is your best alternative to chaos. And collapses. This will all lead to collapse. Unless you come at negotiated solutions. In most situations, there is really no alternative but to negotiate. Like you could get into like a formal conflict situation and go for an arbitration or litigation. But anything short of it, you have to, like negotiate. Even the government negotiates, right? Although it goes by all sorts of laws and rules and other things, but they also negotiate, all the time. For example, the government had a lot of investment treaty arbitrations which went against them, against Kane, which is an oil and gas major in India, and also Vodafone. But they simply negotiated that, we are ready to pay you something and just, close what's done earlier and let's move on. That happened earlier. If you're old enough to know that Enron had opened a power plant in Maharashtra and shut it down. So General Electric and the contractor, which was Batel, no, not Batel, it was sorry, the name will start with Bechtel. I'm sorry, not Batel. Batel is right there at Venture Center. That's a different kind of company, Bechtel. So Bechtel and Enron both initiated the arbitration for a long time, and they were about to win. Enron itself had collapsed. So it was not pursuing it, but these two entities were pursuing it. Ultimately, like General Electric and Bechtel settled it in with this idea that let's move on, and government also like promise them, opportunity, not directly participation, but opportunities to participate in the India story. And General Electric was an early believer into India story and set up a lot of captive design centers, manufacturing locations. I mean, I understand now they have a manufacturing location in Pune also, and they are into all kinds of things, locomotives and power treatment, the water treatment and power equipment and what kind of things. I mean, they of course sell aircraft engines. I mean, they essentially realize that really getting few $100 million from government through an arbitration is not going to help us. But there is really no alternative to negotiation. So that's why I call it the Tina factor. There's no alternative. Then refusing to negotiate is also a tactic, but it works for in the very short term, that I don't want to talk to you. Well, you don't want to talk to you, but you want to do business, right? I mean, you want to interact with the same people, and as you would grow, you would know that you are working in a field of very few number of people. It's not that there are hundreds of people one can engage with. All right, if you're buying commodities like ball pens, or you're buying mops, I mean, you can tell one supplier that, okay, get lost, I don't want to talk to you next time. But if you're buying very specialized equipment, like say transformers, or certain specialized DC power supplies or specialty chemicals, you are dealing with very few number of people in the world. I mean, so who are going to make them and make them of a certain quality or certain type? So then there is no way to not negotiate with them. So I mean, I'll not talk to you, or I'll not do business with you. Happens at trading levels and in commodities, but not in other fields. I mean, negotiations are not perfect solutions. Like a lot of us from technical science background think that I can solve it. I have solved such kind of problems all the time. It's merely putting some numbers around it and some optimization equation to be worked out. Some Newton-Raphson methods variation I'll apply, operation research techniques I'll apply, and find out the optimal solutions. But this is not that kind of problem, because it's a human, driven kind of process. So while you may have a lot of numbers in negotiations, you may have a lot of factors in negotiations, which are not human, but situational, like prices in the markets or seasonal factors, like availability, stocks, inventory, which are non-human factors. They may be non-human, but ultimately all these factors are controlled by humans at certain level. May not be at the board level, but maybe at different levels. But they are all factors to be controlled. And it's not possible to sit with a spreadsheet and work out an equation and tell the other side, oh, okay, this is the optimal solution. You agree to it. They'll say nothing, we don't need any spreadsheets or any equations, but we just think that, the deal is not in our favor. You may mathematically show that this is the most profitable way to make this deal, but other side may or may not agree, because we all know the black swans, even if you don't believe in, Nicholas Taleb and all that, but unknown catastrophes, like destroying all kinds of probabilities. But still, I think, it's best to view it as a human-driven process where you can use approximations, you can use calculations as a method to achieve some common ground. I mean, and some common understanding. Because somewhere, let's say, it's about some oil discovery that has happened. Now, both the parties can agree on some, estimates that have been drawn up by experts that what's the potential of this oil field. And those estimates are usually accepted by everybody in the market. And that's how you can come up with a price based on those estimates. So it's a human-driven process with lots of analytics possible, but whether other side will buy them and other side will take them in the right spirit, it depends upon many, many other factors as to who is on the other side, what is the kind of problems, what are the factors you are trying to persuade upon. And they'll have their own calculations and viewpoints about it as such. the interesting thing about negotiation is that there's a lot of creativity built into it. You can have a lot of new outcomes which neither side had planned. I mean, that this would be the outcomes of the process. So lots of times the process is iterative, time consuming, resource intensive. You would have seen with investors, like they keep talking, except they don't put in the money on the table as such. And that's the iterative nature of the process. The idea or the attitude which founders have, and which I was one of them at some point, is that, oh, I have a great idea. Why don't you just plunk in the money, like so that I can build the next greatest thing since sliced bread. But that's not how it is. Their viewpoint is completely different. I mean, so they would choose to think about it in a completely different way. And you'll have to come to some common understanding of all the factors and how they need to be interpreted or arranged, or how things would play out, and essentially communicate that to the other side and bring them over to your side, or go to their side, to some extent. So that's the nature of the process. But it can come up with new outcomes which nobody had planned. So how do you negotiate? We all do that without really knowing, because it's really not a very conscious process unless somebody puts in effort to think about it. And there are lots of people who put in that effort. I mean, lots of aimless negotiations leads to non-optimized outcomes. It essentially leads to losses on the either side or both sides sometimes. It also leads to bad relationships, because losses usually destroy business relationships, right? And there would be unallocated losses, in the sense that there is a loss, but nobody's sure who will pick it up, whether it's the buyer, seller, or end customer, or second, third party you have sold to, who will pick up the losses. It's completely unknown. So we all negotiate with all these things happening all the time, but we may not know about it. We may only know it from the tough outcomes when the negotiations fail, or we may temporarily think that we have achieved a certain understanding, which may or may not be sustainable. So can it be better? So there is a lot of academic research backed by empirical studies of essentially interdisciplinary kind, which indicate that you can have improved negotiations. So there are many ideas, then many skills, etc., to learn and apply. Even being aware of these skills, or ideas, help you become better negotiator. I mean, because it's almost like poker players, right? I mean, lots of times you are using information asymmetry to your advantage in negotiations, or you are at a disadvantage not knowing all the things. But yet, even with that approximations, we have to go ahead with whatever is happening or whatever the task is at hand and deliver. And if you can deliver it without, burning your fingers, even with limited information and limited opportunity to negotiate, I think you have done well. So there are a range of problems to which negotiation theory has been applied, from family disputes, local governance, business deals, to hostage negotiations. And apart from hard economic data, which is, simply measurements of various factors, we are now faced with completely new set of ideas from behavioral economics. Now, behavioral economics has thrown out the idea that human beings are rational, or which, the older kind of economics believed in. Behavioral economics rather takes this approach that human beings are irrational, and how do we deal with it? Well, this is not unknown to the older world, like pre behavioral economics world, because we, in statistics, for example, working with uncertainty like Bayes theorem and other things, or Bayesian statistics, was always known that we may not have all the information, yet can we make estimates? I mean, so, and how close are those estimates to a situation where we had all the information and we could take a perfect decision? So that kind of, a lot of studies are available, but obviously, these are not something which you can sit down and apply in each particular situation. a lot of time negotiations are simply done with gut feelings that I think this would be right and I'm taking a good bet on it. But problem is, if you read, there is a website called Farnham Street or FS blog. I mean, it talks a lot about mental models and all the cognitive biases. Lots of diagrams exist. You go to Wikipedia, there is a huge diagram which lists out all different cognitive biases like confirmation biases, anchoring, and whatnot. So now, the current thinking about human beings is even more muddled, that we are not rational animals, but we are driven by both emotion and like reason, and a mix of it, and which will dominate other, we simply can't tell. So in that kind of situation, negotiations or understanding about them becomes even harder. But then we have, like, it's up to us, how to use this new information which is there coming from behavioral economics, I mean, and still try and, negotiate to advantage of both the parties. So there are these 4 key approaches. I never tire of repeating them as such. So there is a decision analysis approach, there is a behavioral decision making approach, lots of game theory analysis, study negotiations, and there is negotiation analysis itself, I mean. So these are essentially approaches based on human behavior, viewed as a transactional system, a behavioral system, which assumes that there are inbuilt behavioral characteristics which would force you to behave in a certain way. And they may be coming from our animal instincts, they may be coming from, just prejudiced notions, whatever it may be. But behavioral aspects are considered to be, like a way to understand negotiations, that people would behave in a certain way. There is human-centric way to do it, and there is a transactional way, exchange way of doing it, that if you make certain kind of negotiations or exchanges, it is possible to, come up at optimal, kind of understandings, because parties have exchanged something and tested essentially whether their systems work and they can get along with each other and do negotiations, I mean. Advantages are more resilient with change, like the human approach sort of works better with changes, and complexity is accounted for. We don't deny complexity in human-centric negotiations, but we essentially embrace it and deal with it and live with its consequences if they be adverse. It's possible that you have full, open, and truthful exchange kind of negotiations, or you have partial, open, and truthful exchange of negotiations, negotiation positions, or communication during negotiations. Either of those situations may be possible, but the idea is to understand that rarely you will come across a situation wherein full, open, and truthful exchange is possible. It's just not in human psyche that somebody will take a position which would be detrimental to their own interest. I mean, that because that drives everything out, ego and all the personality and identity factors, which is next to impossible. I mean, so we live with partial, open, and truthful exchanges if we are lucky. There is a range of tools available, very shallow ideas, how to be hard-knuckle negotiators, or some of them are very sophisticated with analytical backing. But point is, any models or any kind of understanding which you have built up, if you cannot communicate to the other side, it's never going to be, accepted by the other side, even in a modified form. Because there's always a suspicion in contract negotiations and deal negotiations that if somebody is suggesting me something, then it must be more to their benefit than to my benefit. So you are essentially starting with like a mound of distrust, which you have to cross as a hurdle, and then try and convince the other side that no, look, this would work well for both of us, I mean. So that's the situation. So lots of, if you are interested into going into a little deeper in it, lots of game theoretical tools, behavioral economic tools, behavioral psychology tools are available, statistical tools are available, and all that to build up models, to either to predict and simulate a negotiation, or essentially use it during negotiations to make sure that your positions are not compromised below a point. I mean, and you're always doing a win-win kind of deal. I mean, so that's also possible. Like Shark Tank, where they send the founders back to figure out if they really want to do this deal or not. I presume they will have, although it's not shown on camera, but they probably will go back and work out some numbers on the spreadsheet and say, I agree to the deal or offer to invest or not to invest. I mean, so that's how it goes. I mean, lots of books exist. I mean, and you have the slides and PDF form. You can check those. I mean, the last one by Howard Raifa is very analytical, very mathematical. And if you think that there is a code to be cracked, I think this book can tell you. But the general understanding among the negotiation community is that there is no magic code to be cracked. I mean, you have to build up a new model, apply it, tune it, and see if it sustains when it is populated with real data. And that's how things go. Maybe you'll learn and next time you can do better. But it's possible that you may not get a chance to have a perfect negotiation as your first negotiation. Getting to Yes, it's a book by Professors Fisher and Urey, who started a program at the Harvard Law School with collaboration of business school on teaching negotiations. I mean, the method is very simple, that separate people from the problem, focus on interests, not the positions, invest options for mutual gain, excuse me, and insist on using objective criteria. So people, interest, options, and criteria. The hardest part here is, inventing options for mutual gain. If you are in a very narrow zone where price is the only thing, left to negotiate, let's say you're negotiating with a private taxi cab operator and your price is the only factor you're negotiating, then I think, like inventing options for mutual gain may or may not be possible. It may be possible, for example, you tell him that drop me at this location and you can head home to your village or wherever you want to go. That may work out win-win because you reach your destination and that person, then goes off somewhere and comes back when you have to leave. I mean, so that's possible, but lots of price negotiations are of this kind where inventing options is extremely hard or is non-existent. So make sure that, you want to deal with people where inventing options is an acceptable thing and not a sign of weakness. Let's apply this method, like to a problem. Your company has ordered 10,000 units of raw material at rupees 10 per unit for a supplier. S is the sole supplier for this material in India. S, after booking your order, decided to sell the 10,000 units in stock that could be supplied to you to another customer who paid rupees 15 per unit. So they made, like a profit of rupees 5 per unit. You're mad at him and ask him and think of suing him. Before taking that noble step, you set up a meeting and you ask your friend S, to do principal negotiations for you. I think the way it works is the contract theory and the free market world works on the principle of efficient breach, which means essentially that if I can make more money by breaching the contract, so then I will breach the contract instead of honoring the contract, because I can then make more money outside somewhere. And I'll only be liable to reimburse you for your losses. Rest of the profit I can keep for myself, I mean, as such. So here, if this seller had sold it for 15, so this pocketed a profit of 5 rupees per unit. I mean, so it's possible then to tell them that we'll go for arbitration, or essentially you please pay me back my money unless the school has withheld it for whatever reason. I mean, they may have withheld. So I'll check with the school, but that's how it could be. All right. So those are, like how would you apply this principal negotiation framework? Here you would essentially come up the idea. The hardest part, as I said, is creating options. Is what do you create as options? Like for the seller to give you, like this particular a quantity of materials, I mean, at a certain price. One thing is you could say that, all right, you can supply me late, but you reduce the price, like of what has been agreed as 10 per unit to say 8 per unit or 9 per unit. Or you could tell an alternative that to them that, can you get something else which would work instead of the product, like which you have contracted for. If you can find another product as a replacement, as a workable product, and ask for a sizable discount at the same time, that maybe also be an option. I mean, so it's the example where I'm giving this is that even in the most narrow situations where price is the only differentiator, no situation is no simple that only taking small amount of money or small amount of concession would actually work out. I mean, but you can take a large concession and make the contract workable. I mean, the agreement workable. Let's see what entrepreneurial negotiations are. You have investor negotiations, co-founder negotiations, initial customer negotiations, and resale allocation. I mean, obviously, a lot of things are left out, like sales negotiations and team negotiations. But I mean, there is limit of space and time constraints. I mean, so before jumping to that, let me look at some questions. I mean, so somebody says, I mean, that I get stuck between ethics, what I deserve and what do they know better in sales negotiations. So I often don't know how to choose or decide. I think sales negotiations are a classic example of information asymmetry working to your advantage or to your disadvantage. If it's working to your disadvantage, it's working to the advantage of others. So the common things to remedy it, sort of pick as much as brains as you can of people in the field to understand, what are the sales factors, I mean, which go through and which make the deal happen in that particular line of business. And essentially build better relationships where some of this idea that I alone take away all the profit on the table goes away. I mean, because if you are in a multi-step environment where everybody is trading with everybody, it's not possible to say that I won't do business with you and try and develop a new network from scratch. May not be necessary. Okay. Oh, somebody says that I do not understand what are sales negotiations. Well, sales negotiations are you simply trying to persuade your customer to buy your stuff and more of it. I mean, and more often. So those are sales negotiations. And lots of things go in sales negotiations. For example, bundling of products, like you may want to sell one product as your lead product, but you still want to push the other two products also, which may be at different price point and do the same thing. Like a Hindustan Liver soap, Lifebuoy also is a bathing soap, and so is, like Dove. So there are multiple sales to be done and all different kind of negotiations. Obviously the negotiations which go to push, like a very low cost product like Lifebuoy, the negotiations for pushing into market more of premium product like Dove would be very different, right? So those are like this thing. So somebody's asked, what's the site for mental models? You can do a Google search. It's Farnham Street. Or FS blog, it's one and the same thing. So you can check either of them for mental models. All right, let me cover up the material and then come back to some questions again. Investor negotiations, it's extremely important to separate people from the problem in investor negotiation. For the simple example that the VC firms or the funds, partners of the funds who are sitting at the table negotiating an investment with you, try and understand that they are representing somebody else. They are representing their limited partners or general partners whose money they are managing. So all the funds are essentially money managers. So for them to believe in you or not to believe in you, they are directly reflecting what their principals have told them. They are simply agents. So here, unless you separate the people from the problem, unless you give them an argument that if you give them an argument, we have a long-standing relationship and we are all good friends and all that. So why are you doing this to me? Why are you not putting in more money, investing? That will not work. I mean, because unless you separate people from the problem, you would not know. You would think it's a people problem. That only if people believed in me more, I would have done more transactions or got more investments. I mean, it doesn't work that way. You have to separate people from the problem. Your problem is getting more investments, but your people who are running the venture capital firms or investors are not your problem. Your problem is that whatever you are doing is not attractive enough for them to put in money, either initially or as follow-on, or they've stopped believing, like your story, and they don't want to fund it further. So just try and understand that here they are not doing, like anything personally as a vendetta against you. What they are doing is essentially what is best in interest of their clients, which is to earn rapid returns for whatever they are doing. So try and separate the people from the problem. So investors also have their own interests in investing, right? They have chosen, there is an opportunity cost with every investment. You could be deploying this money, if nothing else, in a fixed deposit and still making money. So you got to give it to, like the investors that they could be investing in something else and not you. So again, very important to understand, separate the people from the problem in these kind of situations. Control and strategy are always the core issues. If an investor comes in, they will try and influence your control and try and influence your strategy of the business all the time. That happens all the time. But the big question is essentially that in which direction do they want the company to be taken to? And are you agreeable as the founders after the investors have had a majority stake? Are you interested in letting that happen or not? So if you are interested, then you will let it happen. Okay. So second step of like principal negotiation, focus on interest, not positions. You need to not just talk, from product strategy, all other aspects. Sticking to positions that are pre-investment doesn't work. So people keep on repeating the same story. They keep on harping the same story. Oh, I'm making a great product or a great service. And they think that repeating it again and again, they would be validating it from others. But it doesn't work that way. What you want is validation in terms of actual investments. And it's not the pitch deck or, like other things that you are doing. They are nice to have. They are necessary to have. But as we say in science and maths, they are necessary conditions, but they're not sufficient conditions. You need both necessary and sufficient conditions for the theorem to be proved right. Right? So here your necessary condition is, yes, you need to be investor, you need to have investors, you need to be pitching to them, but that's not going to be sufficient, because if you're not making deals, like which are sustainable for everybody concerned, they may not last. And one thing about Fisher and Urey is that they force the readers to think that, like the long-term sustainable deals are the real win-win deals. If it should work out for both the sides. You may be starting as competitors, you may be starting as antagonists. Your interests may be opposed to each other's, right? You want the company to run, other side may want to shut down right away. But that's not how it works. You will have to, like try and see across the shoulder to see what interest they bring to the table. They may be like very experienced, bringing you company contacts, or they may just be, like liabilities for the firm for doing some experiments, as such. Invent options for mutual gain. This is the hard part. There are times when, it's not possible to create options for mutual gain. If there are very limited players and very limited suppliers and very limited circumstances, it's not possible to create options for mutual gain. So we accept that, but there is a small class of problems that happens to be of this kind, where options, now it's not possible to create more options, for mutual gains as such. But those of situations are few and far between, and you can always bundle it with something else and come up with some options. Insist on using objective criteria. So let's say you're dealing with money. The most objective criteria is going to be discounted cash flow. Now you can set up an argument, and you would probably win that argument if you say that DCF is not perfect. In the net present value formula and the DCF formula, if you have a magic number, which is just an assumed number, right? The discount rate, or the interest rate. Now that is going to be a problem, because that's a magic number pulled out of hat. And by the time your dispute continues and gets resolved, that magic number is also going to change. So it's a problem. But if there is nothing else, and a discounted cash flow could show a situation to the other side, and both of you can agree on the model and tweaking the model as time goes by, well, that's also progress, right? That's also like negotiations, and you have avoided problems. So that's all right to do it. There are many other issues. Multiple investors clash in interest. Some investors want to shut down the company. Some investors want the company to pivot. Even more other investors want the company to just stick to what they are doing, and maybe someday they will succeed. So different investors bring different interests. And as an entrepreneur, it is up to you not just to create the best possible product or service that you are set out to create, but you should also be creating, the best possible investors for you, because those are the ones who will keep reinvesting in you, maybe in this venture, maybe in other ventures. So it's very important to cultivate investors. But all of these, may or may not fit into exactly the kind of things you do routinely every day. So you'll have to take out some time to understand, what is this behavioral stuff about, and see that, all these different factors define, apply or don't apply. Let's look at technology deals. Technology is a hybrid aggregate, it's always products and services. Rarely you would find, even if you buy a simple modem, right? It comes with firmware. So it's already software and hardware together. Today it's very hard to find. Maybe halogen lights may be the only thing left, which does not have a microprocessor inside it. But everything else has a microprocessor and software inside it. So it's now a hybrid aggregate. So very hard to slice, dice, and monetize it. Over time, as such. So it's easy to say that let's give non-exclusive licenses and retain the maximum value with the owner of the technology, but it is not easy. This is a strategy not suitable for startups to fight it out. It's best to take some rent and get out of the flat if it is not affordable to a founder. But if it is affordable to founder and can manage, then it's a different thing. They can always accommodate you. So technology is a slicing problem. Slicing, how do you define different packages which can be licensed? It's easy to say that non-exclusive licenses retain maximum value for technology, but that is not a very easy strategy to execute. I can tell you that. And it's not even an academic problem to essentially manage the deeply linked market knowledge and relations with potential customers. You'll have to collect this knowledge, and market knowledge is the hardest knowledge to find. You'll find all kinds of databases, and Google search can pull up all kinds of things. But to find out, essentially that what is the situation of the lender, it's not easy. And you'll have to probably find out your own ways to find them. Technology can be diced in geographies, markets, time periods, etc., to come up with, a global IP arrangement, or technology licensing arrangement. All right. The main thing in a technology deal is always control. The person who is handing over the technology always thinks that a bad licensing deal would make them lose control of the technology. The policing or auditing clauses are extremely hard to implement. Everybody likes to put them in, but implementing them is very hard, and it's usually the starting point of dispute that somebody asks that I have the rights to check everything. I've come in and like a raid on an office, I'm going to check everything that you have done so far. Doesn't work that way. Giving up control is never easy, but also trusting that the person or entity that you are licensing to will use this knowledge and information in a fair way, so that the rewards reaped can be divided between the parties in some fair and equitable manner. So that's what is the hope, but it doesn't work that way, and lots of academic or government institutions are always worried that are we doing a bad deal, or will be called upon to question someday that why did you do or not do this or that kind of deal. So I prefer lump sum deals, because technology is hard to put a value to unless you are building something which the market has and there is a direct replacement. Let's say you make like some kind of an efficient motor to pump water. Well, that design has been around since more than 100 years. And unless you are going to do something dramatic, that's really no great technology to license, So here you would rather go for a lump sum deal, make money, and then do other things, rather than thinking that you must earn $1 million or $10 million out of licensing this technology. Don't be stupid. The money now is much more valuable than money later. So considering that principle, if you're getting a good deal now, sell the technology, then move on, invent other things, do other things not related. Do something else in the other field and make a name for yourself and make money for yourself. So the post-licensing developments are the very hard ones to manage, particularly controlling the ownership of IP and who owns the modifications. Things like copyright, are the most hard thing to manage, because it has a very low threshold of that parallelly somebody could not come up with something. So if you have an employee who has left and started something of their own design, you really can't do much, as such. And just to say that he stole these designs in mind cannot work, as such. So that's one of the post-licensing developments, keeps happening all the time. Academic research licensing, I think Dr. Premnath is the best person to talk about it. Very challenging in India, and we are seeing some success over the years, but it's not really taken off. Let's put it that way, put a nice spin to it. Nobody's patents is earning millions and millions of dollars revenues, as such. So it's because of partly mix of factors, partly because of the areas in which research happens, and also whether it happens at all or not. Because a lot of colleges I go to, etc., undergraduate colleges, maybe that's why, but they have a problem, like keeping up with the new people who are making things, as such. So market-oriented research and speed to productization, these are challenges for academic research and licensing, because what they make is proof of concept and lab scale stuff, and to take it to productization or manufacturability is always a hard journey. And whether that each side appreciates others' role in the process and what is their contribution, and hence the valuation of technology, then and then only it can work. Otherwise, it would be a problem. If you have two different views of what's being done and what needs to be done. Dispute resolution, having a contract licenses, start enforcing contracts is very expensive. Let me tell you that as a disputes lawyer. So see if like you don't do any hasty terminations of the agreement or other things, because an international litigation is very expensive. It's way beyond a budget of anybody, any business houses here. Like forget about startups or anybody trying to sue somebody in the United States. I mean, extremely hard proposition to do. I mean, as such. So a lot of startups get US patent, but I ask them that, would you have the guts to sue in United States? But nobody has. Then they say that there are fee arrangements, there are contingency fee arrangements and all that. But try and understand that these things are of limited notional value, may help you in getting, like investments and all that. But you can only use them as a defensive shield, but using them as a sword is out of question given the costs involved in trying to do that. So there is a case study to look up to, but let me take some questions. I mean, so I'll start from first in, first out. Or yeah, somebody's reading Chris Voss's book, who was an FBI hostage negotiator, and he runs some popular seminars. That's fine. I mean, like you can learn and read from anything. I mean, never split the difference is a good thing, whereby people say, let's do 50-50 of losses or profits. I mean, but sometimes 50-50 is a good, like measure to share things. So I'm not against 50-50 or split in the middle as something canonically not to be tried out, but can't be like, each and everything solution is that let's share in the losses 50-50 or let's share in the profits 50-50. So finding middle ground is, like sometimes hard thing, and empathy and all those factors are soft factors are there. But in commercial negotiations, like maybe in hostage negotiations, empathy works better, but in commercial negotiations, money works better. I mean, instead of empathy, people say, all right, keep your empathy with you, but let's talk money. I mean, so one must have like a simple, like commercial approach when doing commercial deals and not think of hostage negotiations as the way to go about it. And that's why this is a toolbox where you need to develop tools and use them in some, sensible manner. While I'm aware of every situation and people in those situations are different, as startup, we are hiring vendors and others, some buyers which are smaller ticket at the beginning, and they gradually move on to bigger counterparts. These smaller counterparts typically are loaded from the other counterparts in the value chain, given that how best we can preserve a win-win situation in early days. I think good contracts help, good simple contracts help, which are understandable and sustainable. May not have all like 1,000 clauses in them, but simple good contracts help, which cover the essentials. I mean, and then you should be planning, for some margins or buffer margins of error. Let's say you have asked 8 days as a time, and you should know that, like time is not always, like some factor which is respected in India. So 8 could mean 14-15 days also. So rest of the part is where you build up, resiliency in your own plans and in the contracts itself as such. So most biotech founders are scientists and no experts in negotiations. Whom to take along from negotiations for technology or investment CAs? Well, I mean, I don't have anything against the CAs, but they tend to think that they are experts in everything, while their original background is tax advice and auditing. But they tend to get into everything because I think they know a little bit of every law. I mean, so CAs, I don't think so. They are the best. Neither are the lawyers. Lawyers are not experts in everything, right? Most of them are illiterate in numbers. They really don't like numbers. So, like see what kind of expertise works best for you. So I'm not running down anybody. Somebody may be very good as an individual with very good skills. I mean, whether a lawyer or CA or some other kind of expert, but nobody is an expert in everything. I mean, that's something to remember. And if you are the founder, see, consultants are consultants, right? Who's going to face the failure? You are going to face the failure. So you'll have to develop, like business skills. I mean, and you have chosen to be entrepreneur just doesn't mean that you will be in the labs and, do whatever you were doing as PhD student or postdoc student, right? I mean, you'll have to become a businessman, learn and become a businessman, and see things around, experience things around, do deals. I mean, do negotiate, and you'll have to pay tuition fee. You'll have to lose some money. You'll have to lose some opportunities. You'll have to have setbacks. Only then you'll learn. I mean, so it's just like any other experimentation. This whole entrepreneurship is an experiment. I mean, within which you will conduct like many other small experiments. So that's the part of the nature of the beast. I mean, as
Yeah,
such.
Hasit, before you proceed,
Yeah.
wanted to remind everyone the feedback link for this session is in the chat box. So please do click on the feedback form and give your feedback before you leave the session. Hasit,
Thanks, Mugdha. How much time do we have, or have we run out of time?
we have run out of time, but that's okay. There's one more
Okay.
last question there in the chat box.
Okay. All right. So there is like one question about, like how do you
Employee negotiation.
like, or there is one more like retain employees or like do employee negotiations.
Yeah.
I don't think so. Anything, like reflects human factors or behavioral psychology and behavioral economics more than, an employer-employee situation. Somebody is working for you essentially, and you are paying them for you. The idea is, to leverage labor, right? I mean, or expertise. So, or time essentially. So most like, profit in the world is made from leveraging three things. Four things rather, leveraging labor, leveraging capital, leveraging resources, which means natural resources or materials of all kinds, and last leverage is of ideas, which the creative people sort of do. They do one movie and, earn millions of rupees. I mean, so that's leveraging, like the creative side of things. I mean, as such. So employer-employee relationship, I think, try and understand, like, don't tell people what they, like already know. For example, convincing a person that, you'll have a bright career with a startup, when you yourself, like didn't take your first job with a startup. Did you risk, so much working with a startup as your first job? If you yourself were risk averse, you wanted to settle down, buy a house, and, like do other things in life, from your first job before you decided to become an entrepreneur, how do you expect, your employees to take that kind of risk, which you yourself didn't take? I mean, so it's important, to realize this and then deal with people. Don't tell people that money is not everything. Well, money is everything. And then beyond that, what we have to offer. So if you're not offering competitive money, then, like that's not going to work, because people already know that, like money is important. And there is a TED talk, of one particular researcher. I think she's from Yale. She has worked with chimpanzees and, like found out that they also understand the concept of money. There are YouTube videos where, like even animals understand the concept of money. I mean, them experiments with monkeys who can figure out, that some money can buy better things and some money cannot buy better things. So trying to tell people that money is not working everything, mission and, passion is everything and all that doesn't work. Start with money, offer, good money, and then see, like what else you have to offer. But you are the one who is going to be the biggest, like beneficiary if your startup clicks and you're going to make money. You are not going to share those things with the employee, except for small bit of equity or sweat equity you might share with them. So you take the biggest risk. Don't expect the employees to take the biggest risk. So that's the reality, and that has to be accepted. People say, and when I read a startup, I used to say nobody wants to work with startups. Well, that's a reality, because I mean everybody wants to earn money, and that has to be accepted. And that's the thing with negotiations, that we have to accept realities and then start, from that as a starting point. So lots of things in the world, people behave in a certain way because they are people. They will not behave in the way you want them all the time. And employees is just one kind of people that you will meet and deal with in life. All right. The last one, could you please kick the case studies and
Hasit, do you want to share the case study, or you can quickly?
It's part of the this thing, the slides, I mean. So I mean, it's there, and I can just tell you it's a technology negotiations, and you could try it. I mean, think through it, and you can apply the principles, the 4 principles given for principal negotiations earlier in the slide set, and think through it. I think there is no perfect solution to it. I mean, there is very little data given here, but there is no perfect solutions to it, and I would think that you should try it out with somebody else on the other side and try it out as a negotiation exercise. All right? Okay.
Sure.
Thank you.
So thank you, Hasit, for covering so much ground today and also spending more time beyond your committed time. We also look forward to meeting you next for the next session. Let me remind everyone, the next session is on only open source licensing, and we will meet Hasit on 2nd of May again at 4:30 p.m. For this next talk. So please do join us for this next session also, and do not forget to give your feedback for today's session. Thank you once again, Hasit, for joining.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody.
Okay, bye.
Thank you, Dr. Premnath. Thank you, Mugdha.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.